Cold War, De-Stalinisation and Maoism, 1944 to 1953. Upon Allied victory, concluding the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, the members of the Grand Alliance resumed their pre-war geopolitical rivalries and ideological tensions, which disunity broke their anti-fascist wartime alliance through the concept of totalitarianism into the anti-communist Western Bloc and the Marxist-Leninist Eastern Bloc. The renewed competition for geopolitical hegemony resulted in the bipolar Cold War, 1947 to 1991, a protracted state of tension, military and diplomatic, between the United States and the Soviet Union, which often threatened a Soviet-American nuclear war. But it usually featured proxy wars in the Third World. With the end of the Grand Alliance and the start of the Cold War, anti-fascism became part of both the official ideology and language of communist states, especially in East Germany. Fascist and anti-fascism, with the latter used to mean a general anti-capitalist struggle against the Western world and NATO, became epithets widely used by Marxist-Leninists to smear their opponents, including democratic socialists, libertarian socialists, social democrats, and other anti-Stalinist leftists. The events that precipitated the Cold War in Europe were the Soviet and Yugoslav, Bulgarian and Albanian military interventions to the Greek Civil War, 1944 to 1949, on behalf of the Communist Party of Greece, and the Berlin Blockade, 1948 to 1949, by the Soviet Union. The event that precipitated the Cold War in continental Asia was the resumption of the Chinese Civil War, 1927 to 1949, fought between the anti-communist Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party. After military defeat exiled Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang nationalist government to Formosa Island, Taiwan, Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China on the 1st October 1949. In the late 1940s, the geopolitics of the Eastern Bloc countries under Soviet predominance featured an official and personal style of socialist diplomacy that failed Stalin and Tito when Tito refused to subordinating Yugoslavia to the Soviet Union. In 1948, circumstance and cultural personality aggravated the matter into the Yugoslav-Soviet split, 1948 to 1955. That resulted from Tito's rejection of Stalin's demand to subordinate the Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia to the geopolitical agenda, economic and military, of the Soviet Union, i.e., Tito at Stalin's disposal. Stalin punished Tito's refusal by denouncing him as an ideological revisionist of Marxism-Leninism, by denouncing Yugoslavia's practice of Titoism as socialism deviated from the cause of world communism, and by expelling the Communist Party of Yugoslavia from the Communist Information Bureau, Cominform. The break from the Eastern Bloc allowed the development of a socialism with Yugoslav characteristics, which allowed doing business with the capitalist West to develop the socialist economy, and the establishment of Yugoslavia's diplomatic and commercial relations with countries of the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. Yugoslavia's international relations matured into the non-aligned movement, 1961, of countries without political allegiance to any power bloc. At the death of Stalin in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became leader of the Soviet Union and of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and then consolidated an anti-Stalinist government. In a secret meeting at the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev denounced Stalin and Stalinism in the speech on the Cult of Personality and Its Consequences, 25th of February 1956, in which he specified and condemned Stalin's dictatorial excesses and abuses of power, such as the Great Purge, 1936 to 1938, and the Cult of Personality. Khrushchev introduced the de-Stalinization of the party and of the Soviet Union. He realized this with the dismantling of the Gulag archipelago of forced labor camps and freeing the prisoners, as well as allowing Soviet civil society greater political freedom of expression, especially for public intellectuals of the intelligentsia, such as the novelist Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose literature obliquely criticized Stalin and the Stalinist police state. De-Stalinization also ended Stalin's national purpose policy of socialism in one country and was replaced with proletarian internationalism, by way of which Khrushchev recommitted the Soviet Union to permanent revolution to realize world communism. In that geopolitical vein, Khrushchev presented de-Stalinization as the restoration of Leninism as the state ideology of the Soviet Union. In the 1950s, the de-Stalinisation of the Soviet Union was ideological bad news for the People's Republic of China, because Soviet and Russian interpretations and applications of Leninism and Orthodox Marxism contradicted the Sinified Marxism-Leninism of Mao Zedong, his Chinese adaptations of Stalinist interpretation and praxis for establishing socialism in China. To realize that leap of Marxist faith in the development of Chinese socialism, the Chinese Communist Party developed Maoism as the official state ideology. As the specifically Chinese development of Marxism-Leninism, Maoism illuminated the cultural differences between the European Russian and the Asian Chinese interpretations and practical applications of Marxism-Leninism in each country. The political differences then provoked geopolitical, ideological, and nationalist tensions, which derived from the different stages of development between the urban society of the industrialized Soviet Union and the agricultural society of the pre-industrial China. The theory versus praxis arguments escalated to theoretic disputes about Marxist-Leninist revisionism and provoked the Sino-Soviet split, 1956 to 1966, and the two countries broke their international relations, diplomatic, political, cultural, and economic. China's Great Leap Forward, an idealistic massive reform project, resulted in an estimated 15 to 55 million deaths between 1959 and 1961, mostly from starvation. In Eastern Asia, the Cold War produced the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. The first proxy war between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc resulted from dual origins, namely the nationalist Koreans' post-war resumption of their Korean Civil War and the imperial war for regional hegemony sponsored by the United States and the Soviet Union. The international response to the North Korean invasion of South Korea was realized by the United Nations Security Council, who voted for war despite the absent Soviet Union and authorized an international military expedition to intervene, expel the northern invaders from the south of Korea, and restore the geopolitical status quo ante of the Soviet and American division of Korea at the 38th parallel of global latitude. Consequent to Chinese military intervention in behalf of North Korea, the magnitude of the infantry warfare reached operational and geographic stalemate, July 1951, July 1953. Afterwards, the shooting war was ended with the Korean Armistice Agreement, 27th of July 1953, and the superpower Cold War in Asia then resumed as the Korean Demilitarized Zone. Consequent to the Sino-Soviet split, the pragmatic China established politics of détente. Third World Conflicts, 1954 to 1979. Communist revolution erupted in the Americas in this period, including revolutions in Bolivia, Cuba, El Salvador, Grenada, Nicaragua, Peru, and Uruguay. The Cuban Revolution, 1953 to 1959, led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, deposed the military dictatorship 1952-1959 of Fulgencio Batista and established the Republic of Cuba, a state formally recognized by the Soviet Union. In response, the United States launched a coup against the Castro government in 1961. However, the CIA's unsuccessful Bay of Pigs invasion, 17th of April 1961, by anti-communist Cuban exiles, impelled the Republic of Cuba to side with the Soviet Union in the geopolitics of the bipolar Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 22 to 28th of October 1962, occurred when the United States opposed Cuba being armed with nuclear missiles by the Soviet Union. After a stalemate confrontation, the United States and the Soviet Union jointly resolved the nuclear missile crisis by respectively removing United States missiles from Turkey and Italy and Soviet missiles from Cuba. Both Bolivia, Canada, and Uruguay faced Marxist-Leninist revolution in the 1960s and 1970s. In Bolivia, this included Che Guevara as a leader until being killed there by government forces. In 1970, the October Crisis, 5th of October to 28th of December 1970, occurred in Canada, a brief revolution in the province of Quebec, where the actions of the Marxist-Leninist and separatist Quebec Liberation Front, FLQ, featured the kidnap of James Cross, the British Trade Commissioner in Canada, and the killing of Pierre Laporte, the Quebec government minister. The political manifesto of the FLQ condemned English-Canadian imperialism in French Quebec and called for an independent, socialist Quebec. The Canadian government's harsh response included the suspension of civil liberties in Quebec and compelled the FLQ leader's flight to Cuba. Uruguay faced Marxist-Leninist revolution from the Tupamaros movement from the 1960s to the 1970s. In 1979, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, FSLN, led by Daniel Ortega, won the Nicaraguan Revolution, 1961 to 1990, against the government of Anastasio Somoza Debayle, 1st December 1974 to 17th of July 1979, to establish a socialist Nicaragua. Within months, the government of Ronald Reagan sponsored the counter-revolutionary Contras in the secret Contra War, 1979 to 1990, against the Sandinista government. In 1989, the Contra War concluded with the signing of the Tela Accord at the port of Tela, Honduras. The Tela Accord required the subsequent voluntary demobilization of the Contra guerrilla armies and the FSLN army. In 1990, a second national election installed to government a majority of non-Sandinista political parties to whom the FSLN handed political power. Since 2006, the FSLN has returned to government, winning every legislative and presidential election in the process, 2006, 2011, and 2016. The Salvadoran Civil War, 1979 to 1992, featured the popularly supported Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, an organization of left-wing parties fighting against the right-wing military government of El Salvador. In 1983, the United States invasion of Grenada, 25 to 29th, October 1983, thwarted the assumption of power by the elected government of the New Jewel Movement, 1973 to 1983, a Marxist-Leninist vanguard party led by Maurice Bishop. In Asia, the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, was the second East-West war fought during the Cold War, 1947 to 1991. In the First Indochina War, 1946 to 1954, the Communist Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, defeated the French colonial re-establishment and its native-associated state in Vietnam. To fill the geopolitical power vacuum caused by French defeat in Southeast Asia, Vietnam was divided into South Vietnam and North Vietnam in 1954. Communists took power in the north, and pro-French government took power in the south. And the United States then became the Western power, supporting the Republic of Vietnam, 1955 to 1975, in the south, headed by President Ngo Dinh Diem, an anti-communist politician. China and the Soviet Union helped the north. Despite possessing military superiority, the United States failed to safeguard South Vietnam from the guerrilla warfare of the Viet Cong sponsored by North Vietnam. On the 30th of January 1968, North Vietnam launched the Tet Offensive, the General Offensive and Uprising of Tet Mau Than, 1968. Although a military failure for the guerrillas and the army, it was a successful psychological warfare operation that decisively turned international public opinion against the United States intervention to the Vietnamese Civil War, with the military withdrawal of the United States from Vietnam in 1973, and the subsequent and consequent fall of Saigon to the North Vietnamese Army's army on 30th of April 1975. With the end of the Vietnam War, Vietnam was reunited under Marxist-Leninist government in 1976. Marxist-Leninist regimes were also established in Vietnam's neighbor states. This included Kampuchea and Laos. Consequent to the Cambodian Civil War, 1968 to 1975, a coalition composed of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, 1941 to 1955, the native Cambodian Marxist-Leninists and the Maoist Khmer Rouge, 1951 to 1999, led by Pol Pot, established Democratic Kampuchea, 1975 to 1982, a communist state led by Angkar that featured class warfare to restructure the society of Old Cambodia, and to be effected and realized with the abolishment of money and private property, the outlawing of religion, the killing of the intelligentsia, and compulsory manual labor for the middle classes by way of death squad state terrorism. To eliminate Western cultural influence, Kampuchea expelled all foreigners and effected the destruction of the urban bourgeoisie of Old Cambodia, first by displacing the population of the capital city, Phnom Penh, and then by displacing the national populace to work farmlands to increase food supplies. Meanwhile, the Khmer Rouge purged Kampuchea of internal enemies, social class and political, cultural and ethnic, at the killing fields, the scope of which became crimes against humanity for the deaths of 2,700,000 people by mass murder and genocide. That social restructuring of Cambodia into Kampuchea included attacks against the Vietnamese ethnic minority of the country, which aggravated the historical, ethnic rivalries between the Viet and the Khmer peoples. Beginning in September 1977, Kampuchea and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam continually engaged in border clashes. In 1978, Vietnam invaded Kampuchea and captured Phnom Penh in January 1979, deposed the Maoist Khmer Rouge from government by the proclamation of the People's Republic of Kampuchea, and established the Cambodia Liberation Front for National Renewal as the Government of Cambodia. The Kampuchean People's Revolutionary Party, KPRP, also came to power in January 1979. A new front of Marxist-Leninist revolution erupted in Africa between 1961 and 1987. Angola, Benin, Congo, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Somalia became communist states governed by their respective native peoples during the 1968 to 1980 period. Marxist-Leninist guerrillas fought the Portuguese colonial war, 1961 to 1974, in 3 countries, namely Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique. In Ethiopia, a Marxist-Leninist revolution deposed the monarchy of Emperor Haile Selassie, 1930 to 1974, and established the Derg government, 1974 to 1987, of the Reform and Collapse, 1979 to 1991. Social resistance to the policies of Marxist-Leninist regimes in Eastern Europe accelerated in strength with the rise of the Solidarity, the first non-Marxist-Leninist controlled trade union in the Warsaw Pact that was formed in the People's Republic of Poland in 1980. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power in the Soviet Union and began policies of radical political reform involving political liberalization, called perestroika and glasnost. Gorbachev's policies were designed at dismantling authoritarian elements of the state that were developed by Stalin, aiming for a return to a supposed ideal communist state that retained one-party structure while allowing the democratic election of competing candidates within the party for political office. Gorbachev also aimed to seek détente with the West and end the Cold War that was no longer economically sustainable to be pursued by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and the United States, under President George H.W. Bush, joined in pushing for the dismantlement of apartheid and oversaw the dismantlement of South African colonial rule over Namibia. Meanwhile, the Central and Eastern European communist states politically deteriorated in response to the success of the Polish Solidarity movement and the possibility of Gorbachev-style political liberalization. In 1989, revolts began across Central and Eastern Europe and China against Marxist-Leninist regimes. In China, the government refused to negotiate with student protesters, resulting in the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre that stopped the revolts by force. The Pan-European Picnic, which was based on an idea by Otto von Habsburg to test the reaction of the Soviet Union, then triggered a peaceful chain reaction in August 1989, at the end of which there was no longer East Germany and the Iron Curtain, and the Marxist-Leninist Eastern Bloc had collapsed. On the one hand, as a result of the Pan-European Picnic, the Marxist-Leninist rulers of the Eastern Bloc did not act decisively, but cracks appeared between them. And, on the other hand, the media-informed Central and Eastern European population now noticed a steady loss of power in their governments. The revolts culminated with the revolt in East Germany against the Marxist-Leninist regime of Erich Honecker and demands for the Berlin Wall to be torn down. The event in East Germany developed into a popular mass revolt, with sections of the Berlin Wall being torn down and East and West Berliners uniting. Gorbachev's refusal to use Soviet forces based in East Germany to suppress the revolt was seen as a sign that the Cold War had ended. Honecker was pressured to resign from office, and the new government committed itself to reunification with West Germany. The Marxist-Leninist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania was forcefully overthrown in 1989, and Ceausescu was executed. Almost Eastern Bloc regimes also fell during the revolutions of 1989, 1988 to 1993. Unrest and eventual collapse of Marxism-Leninism also occurred in Yugoslavia, although for different reasons than those of the Warsaw Pact. The death of Josip Broz Tito in 1980 and the subsequent vacuum of strong leadership amidst an economic crisis allowed the rise of rival ethnic nationalism in the multinational country. The first leader to exploit such nationalism for political purposes was Slobodan Milosevic, who used it to seize power as president of Serbia and demanded concessions to Serbia and Serbs by the other republics in the Yugoslav Federation. This resulted in a surge of both Croatian nationalism and Slovene nationalism in response, and the collapse of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia in 1990. The victory of nationalists in multi-party elections in most of Yugoslavia's constituent republics, and eventually civil war between the various nationalities beginning in 1991. Yugoslavia was dissolved in 1992. The Soviet Union itself collapsed between 1990 and 1991, with a rise of secessionist nationalism and a political power dispute between Gorbachev and Boris Yeltsin, the new leader of the Russian Federation. With the Soviet Union collapsing, Gorbachev prepared the country to become a loose federation of independent states called the Commonwealth of Independent States. Hardline Marxist-Leninist leaders in the military reacted to Gorbachev's policies with the August coup of 1991, in which hardline Marxist-Leninist military leaders overthrew Gorbachev and seized control of the government. This regime only lasted briefly, as widespread popular opposition erupted in street protests and refused to submit. Gorbachev was restored to power, but the various Soviet republics were now set for independence. On the 25th of December 1991, Gorbachev officially announced the dissolution of the Soviet Union, ending the existence of the world's first Marxist-Leninist-led state. Post-Cold War era, 1991 present. Since the fall of the Eastern European Marxist-Leninist regimes, the Soviet Union and a variety of African Marxist-Leninist regimes in 1991, only a few Marxist-Leninist parties remained in power. This include China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. Most Marxist-Leninist communist parties outside of these nations have fared relatively poorly in elections, although other parties have remained or became a relative strong force. In Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has remained a significant political force, winning the 1995 Russian legislative election, almost winning the 1996 Russian presidential election, amid allegations of United States foreign electoral intervention, and generally remaining the second most popular party. In Ukraine, the Communist Party of Ukraine has also exerted influence and governed the country after the 1994 Ukrainian parliamentary election and again after the 2006 Ukrainian parliamentary election. The 2014 Ukrainian parliamentary election, following the Russo-Ukrainian War and the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation, resulted in the loss of its 32 members and no parliamentary representation. In Europe, several Marxist-Leninist parties remain strong. In Cyprus, Dimitris Christofias of AKL won the 2008 Cypriot presidential election. AKL has consistently been the first and third most popular party, winning the 1970, 1981, 2001, and 2006 legislative elections. In the Czech Republic and Portugal, the Communist Party of Bohemia and Moravia and the Portuguese Communist Party have been the second and fourth most popular parties until the 2017 and 2009 legislative elections, respectively. From 2017 to 2021, the Communist Party of Bohemia and Moravia supported the ANO 2011 CSSD minority government, while the Portuguese Communist Party has provided confidence and supply, along with the Ecologist Party, the Greens, and Left Bloc to the Socialist minority government from 2015 to 2019. In Greece, the Communist Party of Greece has led an interim and later national unity government between 1989 and 1990. Constantly remaining the third or fourth most popular party. In Moldova, the Party of Communists of the Republic of Moldova won the 2001, 2005, and April 2009 parliamentary elections. The April 2009 Moldovan elections results were protested, and the July 2009 Moldovan parliamentary election resulted in the formation of the Alliance for European Integration. Failing to elect the president, the 2020 Moldovan parliamentary election resulted in roughly the same representation in the parliament. According to Ion Marandici, a Moldovan political scientist, the Party of Communists differs from those in other countries because it managed to appeal to the ethnic minorities and the anti-Romanian Moldovans. After tracing the adaptation strategy of the party, he found confirming evidence for 5 of the factors contributing to its electoral success, already mentioned in the theoretical literature on former Marxist-Leninist parties, namely the economic situation, the weakness of the opponents, the electoral laws, the fragmentation of the political spectrum, and the legacy of the old regime. However, Marandici identified 7 additional explanatory factors at work in the Moldovan case, namely the foreign support for certain political parties, separatism, the appeal to the ethnic minorities, the alliance-building capacity, the reliance on the Soviet notion of the Moldovan identity, the state-building process, and the control over a significant portion of the media. It is due to these 7 additional factors that the party managed to consolidate and expand its constituency. In the post-Soviet states, the Party of Communists are the only ones who have been in power for so long and did not change the name of the party. In Asia, a number of Marxist-Leninist regimes and movements continue to exist. The People's Republic of China has continued the agenda of Deng Xiaoping's 1980s reforms by initiating significant privatization of the national economy. At the same time, no corresponding political liberalization has occurred, as happened in previous years, to Eastern European countries. In the early 2010s, the Manmohan Singh-led Indian government depended on the parliamentary support of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, which has led state governments in Kerala, Tripura, and West Bengal. However, with the rise of Hindu nationalism, the communists continued to shrink in India and are currently only take power in the state of Kerala. The armed wing of the Communist Party of India, Maoist, has been fighting in the ongoing Naxalite Maoist insurgency against the government of India since 1967 and is still active in East India. Sri Lanka has had Marxist-Leninist ministers in their national governments, such as Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna, and National People's Power, with its Marxist leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake, came to power in 2024. Maoist rebels in Nepal engaged in a civil war from 1996 to 2006 that managed to topple the monarchy there and create a republic. Communist Party of Nepal, unified Marxist-Leninist leader Manmohan Adhikari briefly became prime minister and national leader from 1994 to 1995, and the Maoist guerrilla leader Prachanda was elected prime minister by the Constituent Assembly of Nepal in 2008. Prachanda has since been deposed as prime minister, leading the Maoists, who consider Prachanda's removal to be unjust.